Welcome, everyone. Welcome and hello to tonight's Villij Talk. My name is Latanya. I am the mental health specialist here at the Villij and your host for tonight. For those of you who this might be your very first time joining a Villij Talk, Villij Talk really was created as a space to explore the various dimensions of wellness through conversation with wellness practitioners. So tonight we have a special guest. I am joined by Registered Psychotherapist Chantee Dardaine for a great conversation about emotional regulation. Hey, Chantee. Welcome back to the Villij Talk. Chantee is actually no stranger to the Villij Talk, but for those of you who may not have had a chance to know Chantee, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself? Oh, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I was muted. Oh. You think I would know, I would be pretty tech savvy by this virtual world by now. I was just saying thank you. I'm excited to be here. I love talking about emotions, especially emotional regulation. So I'm stoked to have this conversation. So yes, I'm a psychotherapist. I've been practicing as a psychotherapist for over a year and a half, but I've been in mental health industry for almost 10 years. I've really focused my approach on being accessible, being approachable, and being affordable. That's kind of how my practice is founded within self-care TO. I love the dimensions of self-care, so taking care of all parts of yourself well. And I always say that a lot of my experience is not just from learned knowledge, but a lot of it is from lived knowledge. So I try to show up as authentic as I can, even one-on-one in sessions. Outside of therapy, I am a yoga teacher, so I practice on the mat with with my clients. I'm a dog mom, plant mom. I read a lot. So yeah, and I'm excited to be here and talk about all the feelings.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, before we jump into our talk for tonight, as I mentioned, we will be talking about emotional regulation. I would like to share our house rules with everyone right before, and then we will dive right into it. So this talk will last about an hour. We love engaging with everyone. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And we have a Q&A period near the end, about 5 to 10 minutes. Additionally, we have some questions for you all so we could get your feedback and hear what our community is thinking, how you are feeling, and get to know each other a little bit better. So let's dive right into it. We're actually going to start off tonight with a community question. So this question is for all you guys who are attending tonight. What are your emotional regulation goals? What are your emotional regulation goals? So don't be shy and feel free to put your response in the chat. I can speak for myself. I think I could be open and honest. My emotional regulation goal really is to get to grow in patience and to minimize my irritability. I think that's something that I have been working on for the past, I want to say year, very intentionally, to just look at my patterns and recognize those signs and so on. But I definitely want to hear from everyone who is here tonight. What are some of your emotional regulation goals that you have? So we have Monica here who says to minimize my emotional extremes in moments of high stress. Oh, I think a lot of us can relate to that one. We have Monique who says, working on responding versus reacting this year. Oh, yeah. Benita, when I am passionate about something, I get very emotional and I'm not able to express myself fully. Hoping to work on this. Oh, I love those. These are all really great. I think a lot of us can relate to a lot of these different emotional goals. And we have Tarani who says, being able to witness my emotions versus being consumed by them. Oh, wow. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for sharing. And if you have any more, feel free to drop them in the chat. So Chantee, emotions, Those, aren't they so good?
Yeah.
Emotions, they're like our natural humanistic response, but just like a lot of people shared, they're extremely complex at times. Could you explain how we even came to develop our emotional responses?
For sure. Yeah. And I like to start off this too is, so the word emotion comes from, it's a Latin word and it means that which passes through. And I love that definition because emotions mean movement, right? It's an expression, it's energy, and it's constantly flowing. I think something I like to do is track my mood in a day, and I'll see like that diversity of emotions that I've experienced just in one day. I'll wake up feeling good, then this, and then that. And it's really up to the environment, the atmosphere, what's happening around us, but they're always on the background. So emotions also have a function. They have three roles: to motivate us into action, to emotions help us communicate to others, and they help us communicate to ourselves. So emotions develop from infancy to childhood, at early stages, 3 to 4 months, we can have changes in our facial expressions that suggest an emotional state. In 10 months, children begin to cry, which is an experience of fear. So our early childhood attachments also, I work through the lens of attachment. So that impacts our emotional development because that expresses our needs and our care and the support that we get from our caregivers. So language also plays a huge role. Colors play a role. I think we can all think back to when we were in school and they would tell us, draw anger, or like what color comes to mind. And, we would categorize them. We knew the difference. If I could rewire myself when it comes to emotions, is I wish I wasn't taught what a bad emotion was and what a good emotion was. I wish that I was just taught emotions as an experience, because I think that my relationship with certain emotions would be so different today if somebody didn't tell me it was a bad one. And I think we get these early conditions really early in our childhood, because somebody had to explain to us how this emotion shows up in our body and how to categorize it.
That's so good. I love that. That's so true. Why would you say that emotional regulation even matters?
Yeah, and I think that why most people want to regulate their emotion, like we heard in the chat, is being able to respond instead of react, being able to observe and be less consumed. And I think emotion regulation is really the ability to control or influence which emotions we have, when we have them, and how we experience them. So a lot of us know that emotion regulation also happens automatically, but it can also be consciously controlled when we are in a state of awareness. And that's that key piece there, is that a lot of the time, because we're consumed by the emotion, we're reacting, we're not responding to it. So before we can even regulate emotions, the first step is to understand them. And, so when I work with people one-on-one, when they say, I want to regulate anger, for example, I say, let's take 2 steps back. Let's understand it. Let's name it. Let's understand like why anger is even showing up. According to research, we have about 128 emotions internationally. I think recognized there's about 48. And I don't want to overgeneralize, but with research, they say we kind of work between the lens of like fear, love, anger, shame, disgust, jealousy, sadness, guilt. So 8 emotions we really kind of work within. So knowing that there's so many different emotions that we're experiencing kind of gives us that emotional intelligence to help us regulate it. And something I wanted to talk about today was the difference between a primary and a secondary emotion, because I think that will help a lot of people hopefully walk away with this looking at their emotions a little bit differently. And a primary emotion is the first reaction to the situation. It's the body's first response. And the most common primary emotions are fear and happiness, sadness, and anger, those 4. Secondary emotions are the ones that we have a hard time regulating because they're so complex. They are the feeling about the feeling, right? So this is all learned behavior. It's how we respond and interpret it. So for example, if I get into a fight with my partner, I'm angry. That's my initial reaction. I walk away from that. Now I'm feeling guilty. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling ashamed of myself. So now where do I even go? Like, what am I regulating? My anger, my shame, my guilt? It's too much. I suppress. So that's really the big thing. So today when we are in this chat, I want us to kind of play with this like primary versus secondary emotion.
Wow. That is really good. I should have had this talk earlier today. I literally got upset like an hour ago. And the initial, I guess the primary emotion was, the upset, right? So the anger. And then as soon as I kind of got over the anger, I was like, oh, now I feel bad for being angry. So now I'm like, well, which one, like you said, which one do I choose? Am I going to regulate being angry or feeling guilty for being angry in the first place? Oh my goodness, where were you an hour ago? Like,
and that's such a good example. That's such a good example, right? Because it's your interpretation of what you did that is causing now I feel bad. So even in that ability to interpret anger, that's another thing to regulate too. And also say, why am I interpreting it this way? Or why do I have, if I'm going to get over a emotion, I shouldn't get, technically when we think of emotion, we have to think of it as a release, not a substitution. And I think a lot of us will negotiate. I prefer to feel ashamed than anger, or like, I prefer to feel guilty than this, right? So, but how about another option is just let it go, which seems scary.
Someone in the chat said the feeling about the feeling. Woo. Yes, that's the way I feel right now. Absolutely. So, as children, we begin learning emotional regulation, right? But could you expand upon ways that this development can affect our emotional response as adults?
For sure. Yeah. And I think the development in our childhood is the pre-existing factors that impact our emotional responses as an adult. So if I really was to dissect why I got mad at my partner, there are so many pre-existing factors that led to that outcome. So it's even how I engage and communicate with people. So what we learn in our childhood leads to those interpretations, those thoughts, and those beliefs. So for example, if you learned that crying was weak, then if you cry as an adult, how you regulate that feeling is to suppress it. If you learn that anger is a bad emotion, you never learn how to safely experience it as an adult. So if you had childhood emotional neglect, so childhood trauma, a piece of childhood trauma is emotional neglect. So not getting enough of something like love. You may not then know the need for love because that part of your brain gets turned off, right? If that child is crying for their parent and nobody comes to pick it up, it's going to learn to stop crying. It's going to learn to stop needing. So when we grow up not having options of diverse emotions, then we don't get to name them. And that's what makes it uncomfortable and unfamiliar. So, I think for me personally, I go back to anger because I don't know if people follow me, they'll know I spoke about anger recently because my relationship with anger has really changed. I was really angry for the first time, like during BLM, I was like really angry and I had never really experienced anger for so long. I didn't really know what to do with it. So I thought to myself that nobody, like even the absence of being taught something means I didn't have that tool on how to experience it safely. I didn't really know I could, right? So, because in childhood, it's supposed to be a time of practice and mistake making and figuring things out. We kind of judge ourselves as adult, like, no, you need to just do it the right way, right? And there's no time for curiosity and experimenting, but we can still experiment as adults. So definitely our model of attachment has an impact on how we regulate our emotions, especially in intimate partner and interpersonal relationships, because how they were modeled to us as children is what will be mirrored in our adult life if we don't notice it.
Okay, awesome. And I'm just curious if you don't mind sharing a little bit more. You just said that during the BLM, you had a period of just like, well, I don't want to say extreme anger, but anger that you had not experienced for a time. How were you able to navigate those emotions, especially when it's kind of like foreign to you?
Yeah. Okay, so interesting is that I didn't realize it until the absence of it. I didn't honestly realize I was holding on to so much anger until I realized that I think I woke up one day and I was like, oh, I feel different. Like, what is different? Because I do check-ins and I kind of did a lot of deep reflection I was like, yeah, I had anger in me and I had a lot of anger in me. And because I started watching the trial happening again, I was re-experiencing the anger. And I was like, oh, and it all kind of came to me of I didn't release it. And I think it's because anger, when we hold it in, it comes out in spurts. So I was like snapping at my partner or like getting frustrated at myself. It kept coming out in like random bursts here and there until I was like, oh, I was angry. I named it.
Yes.
I named it, I acknowledged it, and my relationship with anger. And I think because anger within the Black community has always come across as anger equals aggressive, anger is violent, anger is not appropriate for a woman. So nobody was like, oh no, anger is actually okay. Anger means an injustice. Anger means passion. Anger means I need anger to advocate. So your relationship with an emotion can change too. The more you experience it and allow yourself to experience it.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that personal information. So now I have another question for the chat. Which emotion do you find the most difficult to explain? Which emotion do you find the most difficult to explain? It's really interesting, Chantee. How many emotions did you say exist?
Like internationally, about 128, but recognized, crazy. I know, but recognized here, it's about 48. So if anybody is curious, like if you Google like a feeling wheel, you'll get a wheel that shows up, right? And I had that printed off and I show that to people and I say, tell me your feelings through this. And they're like, oh my goodness, I didn't even know I could express myself through these types of feelings, right? And feeling about the feeling. There's so many feelings that live under a feeling.
Oh my goodness. So here in the chat right now, I see a lot of jealousy. I see grief. I see shame, frustration, tears, the confusion that is there. Absolutely confusion, more guilt. I think for myself, I would actually say fear sometimes. It's probably really hard for me to explain, but that's interesting. It's interesting.
Yeah.
We all experience these things, but for whatever reason, when you have to put words into the way you're actually feeling, it's kind of hard to explain sometimes.
Yeah, because it's so subjective to us, right? And how it shows up in our bodies. And it's difficult to experience, especially for me, the emotions that are hard to explain are the ones that I've never experienced. Then I'm like, what are you talking about? What is this thing? Like, I remember starting therapy. I'm like, what does this cultivating of calm mean? Like, I didn't know how to do this. I knew what calm was, but I was like, I didn't know how to do it myself. So I couldn't even, so people would tell me this and I'm like, what? I don't really know. And I have to be, this is why it's so much easier to think than it is to feel, because I think we can conceptualize a feeling. Like fear is something that we can conceptualize, but people aren't going to line up and say, I want to experience it.
Ooh, I like this response here in the chat. Shavea says, I think the ones that are hardest to explain are the ones I suppressed because I disassociated with who I was. Yeah, that kind of reminds me of like what you said earlier, Chantee, when you said you woke up one day and you were like, what is this? And you put a name to it. As you said before, sometimes we just feel in our bodies these various, feelings, and you're not necessarily able to pinpoint like, what is this? But once you do, it's just like, okay, now I can work on it. Now I can understand it a little bit more. But how much can we actually control our emotions, Chantee?
Yeah, I think we want to control our emotions, but sometimes emotions are definitely out of our control. And I would say that I think if we learn how to respond to our emotions, get unstuck from our emotions, and then regulate them to release them, I think that's the big thing is when we feel something, this idea of movement, it's energy, it's meant to come and it's meant to go. Right? So emotions are meant to show up and they're meant to go away. They're meant to dissolve. And some of them take a little bit longer than others. So I think that we need to unlearn that emotions are good and bad. And I think emotions are just are. Defining them as good or bad doesn't alleviate or regulate them. I think that thinking that an emotion is bad can make us just suppress it. And regulating an emotion does not mean getting rid of it, because they can serve as a purpose. And one thing I wanted to share was in DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, one of the big components of DBT is emotion regulation. And one thing that I thought would be nice to share, and I'll just share a couple of them, is understanding how specific emotions live in our lives. So I think somebody had mentioned jealousy. So like, for example, jealousy organizes our response to others who threaten to take away something. So the purpose of jealousy is to protect what we have. For example, shame organizes our ability to relate to personal characteristics or our own behaviors that might be considered dishonored. But the purpose of it is meant to, change specific appeasement behaviors, for example. Fear organizes our response to threat. It helps us with danger. Like I said, anger is injustice, right? So it helps us to focus on self-defense and control. So each emotion that shows up, like I said, kind of be curious of why am I experiencing this? And when we think of emotions, think of it as a form of communication. I know you had mentioned earlier, irritability. So like, what is irritability trying to communicate to me? What is it missing? What does it need? Yeah, because every single emotion wants something. Every emotion has a need. Anger needs justice. Shame needs forgiveness. Sadness needs hope. Irritability needs, comfort, right? So every feeling has a need. So if you suppress it, then you're also suppressing the need, and you're not getting that fulfillment that your body's looking for, maybe. So think of the need. Think of like, if this emotion was talking to me, what would it say?
I love that. That is wonderful. And I want to go a little bit deeper into that in a moment. But right now, I'm kind of wondering, what is it about certain emotions, especially, that make them difficult to communicate or to explain to others?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think if we have a hard time articulating to ourselves what we're feeling, we're definitely gonna have a hard time expressing it to other people. And I think emotions, like I said, they show up because we need something, right? So if we're trying to communicate to others how we feel, it makes it easier to know, like, what's the purpose of me to communicate that? Also, I think that if emotions are considered bad and good again, then we're leaving ourselves up for potential judgment. And the last thing that you want when you're feeling some type of way is to be judged, right? Like, or have to explain why you're feeling this way. I also think that there's a fear of being misunderstood. So if someone doesn't have the same level of emotional intelligence than you, it would be difficult to feel validated. It's like trying to explain to your boss that you need time off because you're overwhelmed. Communicating that might be fearful because you're going to assume like my boss is going to think that I'm lazy, or maybe that I can't do my job well. So what we end up doing is not saying anything and adjusting our life to whatever that feeling is that we're suppressing, because it seems easier in that moment. And it's hard to communicate, especially in the workplace. I've seen that to be the bigger place, and in relationships where it's that fear of how the other person is going to interpret it, right? Because if emotions are up to interpretation, if I used to tell my mom, like, I'm having a sad day, she'll be like, you have a house, you have a roof over your head, you have a plate of food on your table, you've got clothes on your back. I'm like, great. Okay, so I can't feel sad, right? So
wow.
Yeah, a lot of those interpretations, right? So, and that's just mine. Imagine what you might think or somebody else might think of how I feel. It's risky.
Wow. Can we talk a little bit about triggers? We all have them, but how are our triggers even developed to begin with? Because I'm sure a lot of us, when things take place, we're just kind of like, but why did that set me off? Like, where does this thing even come from?
Yeah. So triggers are developed based on our experience. So if you have a good or bad experience with something, then the odds of it triggering that same emotional response is high. So it's our perception of danger and our perception of safety. So not to get too technical, but our autonomic nervous system controls our reaction. So that's what controls our triggers. And our autonomic nervous system is made up of three different, I don't know how to explain it, I guess, three different sectors of our nervous system: our dorsal vagal, our sympathetic, and our ventral vagal. So what I like about this, though, is that our nervous system is developed on experience. So when we have a trigger, it's because our nervous system detected something that made it react that way. So I know sometimes I'm like, damn, like, why did I have that reaction? And then I'm like, okay, well, my nervous system picked up on some type of sign of danger outside of me or inside of me and just did what it knew best. So if I'm walking on a side street at night and that triggers fear, I'm going to avoid it then, probably, right? Because something dangerous is associated to that experience. So the nice thing, though, about the autonomic nervous system being developed by an experience, if you want to be less triggered by something, you have to change the experience. That's the only way. So
I love it.
And then that way, and I think when people think of a trigger, I think our go-to is like, how can I not be triggered? I'll just avoid this. But avoiding it, there's only so much avoiding we can do in this life, right? So the definition at the end of the day of trigger is the cause of the effect. So if you know the effect, how can you navigate that, or how can you adjust that, or how can you change that so it's no longer causing the same response?
Okay, I like that. So even under those same lines, as far as being able to pinpoint the cause, then, what are some tools to help to pinpoint what our triggers are? Because sometimes we don't even know, right? We are met with a situation, we respond in a certain way, and we're kind of like, okay, what exactly took place in this moment that brought me to a place where I had a reaction? So do you have any tools to share?
Yeah. I mean, that first tool that you just said, like, that's the best question to ask yourself, is what got me here? Like, slowing down and asking yourself that, and maybe even after the fact, like, because sometimes it's like in an instant, if I get cut off in the road and I'm like, I could, it's happening in a millisecond, right? But I can slow down and say, after the fact, what got me here? I think getting to know your emotional responses, what makes me feel good? What makes me feel overwhelmed? What makes me feel sad? What makes me feel burnt out? I think if we get to know ourselves better, because we are creatures of habit, the likelihood of it re-triggering us is high. So if I know that this thing keeps getting me into a state of anxiety, of overwhelm, then, and I assume I can't change the situation, but I can at least help my reaction to it and my response to it. Checking in with yourself, emotions are always on in the background. I do this exercise where I'll tell people to hold on to a pen, feel the pen. I know we have got people here, but if you have a sensation in your finger, your awareness goes there if you notice it. So you only notice something if you are aware of it. but I can be holding it. I was holding this pen for the last 32 minutes and I didn't even know I was holding it because it was on in the background, right? So doing a daily check-in with yourself is such a great tool. And there are a few apps and like that you can do, like mood trackers and things like that. And not as a long term, but in the short term, it gives you that awareness of who you are. And when we are triggered, think about restabilizing yourself instead of judging yourself. I think when we get triggered, our quick instinct is, why did I get triggered? I can't believe I did that. I should have known better. Instead of giving compassion to yourself, when you're triggered, what you need is to come down. What you need is not judgment, because that will only keep you up higher. So having that compassion brings you back down. And then once you're down, then you can start to have a conversation about what you could have done differently. But doing that when you're like this is kind of like when you're angry and someone's trying, like you're not rational. Your mind reflects your body. So the state of your mind reflects the state of the body. If the state of my body is in anger, my mind is reflecting that. My mind's not thinking compassion and love. It's thinking fight and safety and danger. So show compassion to yourself when you're triggered, and, think of it like the restabilizing is the key tool, because it's not about that you got triggered. It's shortening the time you stay triggered. So I would love for people, like, it's okay to be triggered. I am triggered, but I don't stay triggered when I am triggered. I try to stabilize myself back into a state of good, or back into a state of calm or content.
I love that. Thank you so much for mentioning self-compassion, because I know, well, for me, that is a struggle. I can easily give and pour out all of the compassion in the world to other people. But when it comes to myself, it's just a little bit more difficult. And I'm sure a lot of people perhaps feel the same way when it comes to that. You mentioned earlier, and you even mentioned just now, doing self-check-ins, emotional self-check-ins. Do you have any how do you typically do your self-check-ins?
Yeah. So I do when I wake up in the morning, I just do my scale question of like 1 to 10, where am I? And, recently I've been doing 1 to 5, because 10 is too much of a higher scale for me, but I just kind of give myself a number of where I'm at. Especially when I'm coming into myself, like when I wake up in the morning, like that's my first sign of like how the day is going to be. If my body's hurting, if I got a busy, where my head's at, if my head goes straight to work, then I know I'm feeling a little stressed out. So I do that. I also have there's a mood tracker app. There's an app called Shine app. There's different apps where they prompt you to kind of put in like, where are you today? And it's kind of like a gradient scale of like a color. You can even give yourself a color. You can be creative with it. I journal in the morning also. So for me, I have my journal right next to my bed. So it's really easy for me. And I kind of just say to myself, like, yeah, how am I feeling today? Which was so interesting, because I went back in time and I never named anger. It's so interesting. You know what I mean? I'm so stuck on this a little bit, because I use myself as a case study when I'm working with other people. But I kind of treat like a weather forecast too, like, am I feeling sunny? Am I feeling rainy? Am I feeling this? Am I feeling that? So whatever way works best for you. But for me right now, the number has been helping, and my goal is never to get to 10. My goal is never perfection. My goal is to stay at the number, or at least get one step higher.
Okay, awesome. So once we are able to determine, what our triggers are, how can we put them in check, just to ensure that our emotions remain controlled, or, as you said, bring it back down to like this homeostasis, like more balanced level?
Yeah, I think once we know the trigger, then we know how we can respond to that trigger. So I think sometimes a trigger is like not anticipated, right? You weren't planning to do that. So knowing your trigger doesn't mean you can avoid it. I think knowing your trigger means that you can be kind to it. You can befriend it, right? So I think when I'm triggered, I just really acknowledge that part of me. I hold myself in that spot. If I physically feel like a part of me is triggered, if I'm like, okay, I honor that part of me is being triggered because of whatever happened. And I ask myself, what do I need? That's like and this can become a habit with practice, because it became a habit for me because I just practiced it. And, I think once you recognize it, then you can shift and break that pattern. I think sometimes we're okay with, oh, I'm triggered, or this triggers me. Like I say that in conversations all the time, like, oh my goodness, I saw this on Twitter and it triggered me. I don't actually like pause though sometimes and say to myself, well, why? Or like, what got me there? Or like, do I not want to be triggered? I think it's kind of part of our system, part of the way that we navigate through life, right? But it really is just about how you're honoring. And I think for all of the emotions right now that we are currently suppressing or avoiding, I challenge you to befriend it. I challenge you to love it. I know it's scary, right? I'm asking you to love these hard emotions, but loving an emotion will let you be with it, with it, and not be with it afraid of it. And your control of an emotion that you can befriend is going to sit with you a lot easier than one that you don't want. I do this exercise where I ask people to draw the feeling that they're avoiding. And most of the time when they draw it, it's ugly, it's nasty, it's like toxic, right? That's in you. Like that's the thing that you're picturing is in your body. I want you to befriend that. And they're like, no, I don't want to befriend that. But that's the only way. Like it's like with any type of discomfort, when you sit with discomfort, you want to sit with discomfort comfortably, right? And to do that, you have to be okay with it. So it's my challenge is to befriend the feeling.
It's interesting that you say that, because as you said, befriend the feeling, automatically what came to my mind was the concept of some emotions being bad and some being good. And because we have, or at least for myself, I have the narrative that to be angry is bad. To be sad is bad. And the idea and the thought of being okay with it is just kind of like super foreign in my mind right now, because it's like, what makes anger okay? But like you need it. I don't know if you've seen that Pixar film. I can't remember the name, but it's all about emotions. And by the end
Inside
of the film,
Out. Maybe.
Inside Out.
I like to quote that movie.
Yes, Inside Out.
It.
If anyone has not seen that movie, definitely check it out, because by the end, you recognize where each emotion plays a significant role. 100%. And I think it's super duper important. So now I have another question just for everyone here tonight. What tools do you use personally to process your emotions? What tools do you use to process your emotions? I can speak for myself. I have been journaling since about 2015. And on my significantly bad days, I tend to go into my journal and go back like years ahead to this specific date to be like, okay, what were you going through at this time? And just that reflection process allows me to see that I overcame something. So whatever is happening in this moment, it will also pass and you will get over it. But I think for me, journaling has been like a really, really big tool for me to really process through the way I'm feeling. So I definitely want to hear from everyone tonight. What tools do you use? Give me some ideas. Fidget ring, journaling, yoga, meditation. I love that. I don't know if this is a tool or not, Chantee, but what I've been doing most recently, like today, whenever I feel significantly like upset or something, I take a shower and I
That's
process
my favorite.
in the shower. Is it? Okay.
Yeah. I'm having a bad day if I'm on like my third shower.
Literally. Literally. Okay, I want to read more from the chat. Benita says, reflecting on triggers from my childhood that is making me react the way I am. Okay, great way to process. Yeah. Ronnie, who says, I find that pen to paper journaling has been challenging for me. I feel like my thoughts come faster than my hand. Okay, I can totally understand that for sure. For sure. The video journaling. Oh, I love that. Video journaling has helped. Okay, great. These are some really great tools. You're giving me ideas. Wheel of life charts every month. Go for a walk. Wonderful tools, you guys. I have been known to seek out a movie that will give me a good cry that feels cleansing. I do that.
Oh yeah, me too. Relate. Oh yeah. I only cry with TV shows and movies.
Really?
Grey's Anatomy makes me cry.
Oh my goodness. Completely. Every episode. Every single episode. Caitlin says, listen to music. Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing. Experiencing certain emotions can feel uncomfortable at times. So what about you, Chantee? What are your helpful tools? I know you said you do the shower thing.
Yeah. Grey's Anatomy. Yeah. I mean, for me, this idea of like befriending has been a really helpful tool for me, because I think that our instinct is to resent, fear, and dislike certain emotions. So I think that is just another way to get rid of it as fast as possible. So befriending that just really lets me use compassion and, just noticing it, acknowledging it, using self-care. What I do, because I think of emotion as something to release, whatever I do, I'm bringing that intention to my practice. So if I'm going for a walk, I'm not coming home until I feel like it's gone. If I'm on my yoga mat, I'm not getting off my yoga mat until I feel like I've left it there. If I've had a really hard day in sessions, I won't leave my room. I do this at the end of every session, actually, is I make sure that I have let go of what I held on to for the day. So sometimes I'm in my office for 20 minutes, sometimes in my office for an hour. So I'm really just looking at everything with intentionality of releasing it. I need to let it go. It is serving me no purpose to get stuck in this emotion. The quicker I let it go, the better it is for me for tomorrow, because I've been there where I've sat in a feeling for 3 days and I stewed in it, and the result was not my desired outcome. So I realized it didn't serve me a purpose to sit in it. And I know how difficult it is to this concept of like releasing it and letting go, but we're being mindful of those secondary emotions. Those are the ones that like keep us really stuck. And I think if you looked at yourself as a third person is really helpful for me. What would I do for a friend? Like Benita said, with kind of going back to your childhood, I do like the inner child and adult child role. Like, what would my inner child need from me right now? Like, she would need some TLC. How can I give her that? So I really like hold myself, because when I'm sad, that's what I want. When I'm sad, I just want to be held. I want to be validated. I want to be loved. I want to be consoled. So I give myself that. I give myself what I'm needing.
Awesome. As we are going to start wrapping up and get into our Q&A, do you have any other habits that we can incorporate to enhance our emotional management?
Yeah, I think overall, like what we chat about today is probably just like understanding what emotions are doing for us. Like, what role is this emotion trying to play? What is it trying to tell me? A helpful tool too is this idea called opposite action. So asking yourself, like, does this emotion fit the facts of what is happening? Is this emotion aligned with the situation? Every single emotion has an action urge in a way. So fear's action urge is to run away and avoid. So opposite action would be approach and don't avoid. Anger, the action urge is to attack. Opposite action would be to gently avoid and to be nice. Sadness, the action urge is to withdraw and to isolate. Opposite action is to get active and reach out. Shame is to hide. Opposite action would be to talk to a friend. So this idea of doing opposite action is really helpful, because sometimes like my initial reaction is like, don't do this. And they're like, okay, what's my opposite action? And then I try to do the opposite action. I may not do it right away, but I might come back to it. Coping ahead of time. So taking care of your mind, your body, and your spirit. think of emotion regulation as a daily practice and not just only for intense emotions. A really good book I just finished reading is called Emotional Agility. That was really helpful. It's not always depression. I can't remember the author of that one, but that one's really helpful too. If you are curious, go and take your EQ test, figure out what your emotional EQ is for emotional intelligence. Practicing mindfulness, so observing your emotion. So to me, it's like experience your emotion as a wave coming and going, and now imagine surfing the emotion wave, right? So try not to block or suppress body sensation. Notice where your body's holding the emotion. Remember that you are not your emotion. That's a big one. Because I experience anger does not make me an angry person. Just because I experience sadness doesn't make me a depressed person, so you are not your emotions. Remember times where you felt different and practice loving your emotion again. Respect that emotion. Do not judge it and radically accept it.
Awesome. Ooh, that was great, Chantee. Thank you. That was great information. Great ways to shift our mindsets when it comes to emotions and triggers and all these different terminologies that we use often. But also, before we get to our Q&A, do you have any type of just exercise that we could do together?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so there's a specific exercise I guess I do for emotion regulation when I'm feeling overwhelmed, and it's a 6-step practice. So we can all do it together. So step 1 is to either close your eyes or lower your gaze downward, whatever you feel most comfortable with. Step 2 is to relax your jaw and the muscles in your face. Step 3 is to lower your shoulders. Step 4 is to take a deep inhale in. Step 5 is to take a nice deep exhale out. And step 6 is to tell yourself a grounding statement. I am safe. I am well. I am recovering. I am loved. I am healing. I'm okay. And I repeat this as often as I need to. And sometimes I go through this cycle more than once until I feel like the state of my body is at a calm place. And then when I'm ready, I just open my eyes and I come back.
I will definitely be incorporating that into my emotional regulation. Thank you for that.
Of course.
Thank you so much. All right, so we have about 10 minutes left till we hit our hour mark. So if we have any questions in the chat, this is the time now to let Chantee know any burning questions that you may have. And while you are preparing your questions, just so everyone can know where we can actually find Chantee, if you would like to further connect, you can find Chantee on Instagram. Her @name is selfcareto. So I will go ahead and include this into the chat. If you want to follow her or connect with her, that would be a great place to do so. And of course, you can always find her on Inner Villij. So if you need to connect with her there, you can do that as well.
Yeah, I love that. I love that it's like nice and quick and you can just send me a message.
Yeah,
that's a benefit.
Absolutely. And you also have a website, selfcareto.ca. Is that right? Perfect. So I'll include
Selfcareto, yeah. It's .com.
Oh, .com. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Tio.com. So we have a question here. The question says, let's see, can people be triggers for you? What I mean is, I know experiences with them create triggers, but how do you navigate those triggers? So firstly, can people be triggers for you? And then secondly, how do you navigate those triggers when you're triggered by people?
Yeah, for sure. Like definitely people can be triggers. I mean, I would be curious to know like what part of them they're triggering. I think that's an important piece, is like different parts of us will also be triggered. So being able to kind of take a step back and say, like, what part of me is triggered, and asking that question of why. Yes, we know the why. Sometimes we can like default it to an experience we've had, or maybe this person reminds me of something, which then means, how is this person showing up in your life, like the capacity of their relationship? Because if it's an intimate partner or an interpersonal and it's not easy to walk away, then I would probably have to involve them in the process of how I cope and deal. It's kind of, here's what you can do differently, here's what I can do differently, and here's what we can do differently. So whenever I'm dealing with people, I always ask myself, is this a me, a them, or an us? And that's how I know how to walk away. Because if it's a me thing, then I know I need to take responsibility of how I choose to show up to that space with them. If it's a them, then I need to protect my energy and also express what I might need from them. And if it's a we, then how can the both of you collaborate, or the few of you collaborate together to ensure that the trigger is minimized? Because it's a tough thing to negotiate. I want to be in this person's life, but at the cost of me being triggered. It's a tough thing to negotiate and bargain with, right? So if they're important to you, then they would probably want to be part of the process. So I hope that helps.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that question. All right. Well, it looks like we've reached the end of our Villij Talk for tonight. Thank you so much, Chantee, for joining us. And thank you, everybody who took the time this evening to spend this hour with us. This was a great conversation. I'm really excited, and we're excited to see you back here in a few weeks for your healing circle. So that is going to be a great, great time where we can share together. Thank you so much, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you.